Hi, I'm Virginia Governor Ralph Northam, and you're listening to the Patients Come First podcast.
Greetings and welcome to the Patients Come First podcast. On today's episode, we're pleased to be joined by Alan Hardwick, the National Business Development Executive with Cordant Health Solutions, a toxicology, laboratory, and specialty pharmacy solutions group that works with hospitals and other healthcare providers around the country. Our conversation is going to cover Alan's unique professional path, the work Cordant does to help healthcare providers respond to the opioid epidemic, and how that work is uniquely personal to Alan. To start with, let's welcome our guest. Alan, thanks for joining the program today.
Thanks for having me, Julian. Look forward to chatting with you.
Well, we're glad to be with you, and we appreciate you taking some time out of your day. Let's introduce you a bit more to the audience, Alan. You're originally from Abingdon, which is in southwest Virginia, which is probably a good 5 or 6 hour drive from where I'm recording this today, outside of Richmond. Your professional career began in pharmaceuticals before you took a multi-year nautical detour. And in this current phase of your career, you're again working in the healthcare sector. If you would, please tell us a little more about your path to this current point.
Yes, you're right, Julian. I started off in pharmaceutical sales, and that took me from Southwest Virginia to Lynchburg, and then finally out to Richmond and Tidewater. And in short, I took a hiatus from the medical sales world when maybe listening to too many Jimmy Buffett songs, I was lured to the sea of sorts and ended up buying a sailboat and left the pharmaceutical world, a safe job and with pay and benefits, and got married in that same year, 1995, and moved to Deltaville, Virginia, for a short while aboard my sailboat. And don't think that sounds too romantic. Living aboard my sailboat really meant that I was living out of the trunk of my car and sleeping on my boat. But that same year, I got married. We moved ashore, and unfortunately, I had a personal tragedy back in the Abingdon area in 1995, where my brother overdosed from a heroin and benzodiazepine combination. And so from there, when I was in the sailboat business, I lived in Deltaville for a while and worked back and forth, Richmond, Tidewater for a short period, moved up to Cape Cod for a couple of years, and then San Diego for 7 years until the bubble burst. And then I came back to the Abingdon area and started my own distribution or independent sales business, and covered everything from surgical cases with upper extremity surgeries and spine surgeries, and had a very interesting perspective at that time, in that I started calling on patients and fitting them with bone growth stimulators following spine surgery. So from that, came back and found myself then, after cat juggling several different lines, took a job with Cordant Health Solutions about 6 years ago, and it has been a sort of a wonderful calling for me, because it helps me sort of obtain a mission in a workplace setting that I've never had before, and that is trying to make sense of my brother's death in 95, and also see how that our services can help providers to address the opiate mess that we have, not only in Southwest Virginia, but across the state.
We appreciate you sharing that perspective with us, and we'll talk a little bit more about Cordant and your personal passion for the work you do now, which is shaped by your family experiences. But let's stay on the personal side for just a moment. If I were to ask your closest confidant or your best friend what Alan Hardwick's one guilty pleasure in life would be, what would that person tell me?
Probably cornering unsuspecting people and giving them a book report of the latest book that I've read, whether it's related to work or history.
Well, sharing knowledge is always a good thing. Let's talk a little bit more about Cordant now, which is an endorsed partner with VHHA's Shared Services Division. If you would, tell the listeners in our audience about some of the unique lab solutions Cordant provides, and how those services help clinicians in the real world as they treat patients who may be struggling with substance use challenges or have other clinical issues.
Yes, we do a lot of unique things, Julian, that other labs don't or will not provide. As you mentioned, we have some advanced testing solutions that are unique to us. One is a oral fluid dose correlation product that we call CORE, and CORE is unique in that it can help give a provider insight as to whether or not a patient is taking their meds as prescribed. And all too frequently, we find those patients that are in the business of diversion, and let's face it, many patients that are in diversion, that is sometimes a family business, and they know that with traditional urine drug testing, that they frequently can take one or two drugs and pass a test or being shown as compliant, but yet they're selling the rest. So we have some insightful information with the CORE test. We also do for Suboxone or MAT or medication-assisted treatment groups. We have testing. It's a low buprenorphine cutoff that is lower than the industry norm by a factor of 100. And we also have an insight, and unfortunately in my area of Southwest Virginia, we have prevalence of methamphetamine, and the providers in our area that are using our DNL isomer testing are identifying more patients that are using street methamphetamine far beyond they ever dreamed of. So, and these are folks from, unfortunately, all walks of life, and it's been a real eye-opener to a lot of providers. So in addition to some unique testing solutions that we have, we also have some information that we provide to clinics and hospital-owned clinics in order to track and stay in compliance to the new Virginia opioid prescribing laws as deemed by the Virginia Board of Medicine. And part of that is tracking drug testing frequency, which we're able to do with a patient report, and it sorts by patient name or by the most months it's been since a patient's been tested. So that frequency report we can use to really monitor the testing and make sure that it's happening so no patients are slipping through the cracks. And also, importantly, the clinic is staying within the prescription opioid mandate.
Well, those services sound very useful, certainly as clinicians and healthcare providers continue to respond to the real challenges, the human challenges that the opioid epidemic has brought forth. Being able to help providers have a real feel for whether or not patients are properly taking medications prescribed to them is a really invaluable service. And then also making sure that people aren't misusing their medications is also really, really vital information as clinicians, as physicians are prescribing medications. So those are really important services. You mentioned a little bit earlier about your personal connection to this issue. You mentioned your brother and his untimely passing as a result of substance use. And as you mentioned, policymakers in Richmond at the General Assembly, in Washington and Congress are grappling with this issue as providers are. And so compliance with the law is important. But there's also, as we mentioned, a real human impact here. I'd like you to talk a little bit more about your brother. Your brother is one of, unfortunately, the many people who have been claimed by this epidemic. Just in the past 10 years, this is a staggering statistic in Virginia. More than 7,000 people have lost their lives due to fatal overdose associated with opioids. So that's just one figure that shows the scope of this challenge. So if you would, just share a little bit more about your brother so our listeners have a sense of that and how this is personal to you.
Sure. The death of my brother in 1995 was a real shock to my parents and myself. I grew up on a farm, and in Southwest Virginia, you sort of thought that heroin was more of a city-only epidemic or problem. And actually, the opioid issue had not clearly hit Southwest Virginia or the rest of Virginia or sort of the Southeast in such numbers in 95. So he was really a bit ahead of that trend. And from 8th grade on, where he was 13 years old smoking marijuana, and then rummaging through everyone's medicine cabinet, it became just a growing problem, and mixed with alcohol. And in that process, losing 2 marriages and having 3 young daughters that were left, it was tough to imagine how could he have made that choice to love drugs more than his family. And so lots of turmoil, lots of pushing and shoving with my dad growing up, and the heartache of his loss. My mother asking herself, how can she go on and teach other children in Sunday school and those sort of things. And so it was tough to really wrap our head around that. And knowing now what we know about opioid use and addiction, that heroin was a alternative, and now because of the low cost of it and clamping down on some of the prescribing, that it's becoming more prominent. And so it was a tough process for us growing up, and still defines, I think, my family today. By every Christmas or holiday or event now that his children now have a couple of grandchildren, and going to those events and giving my brother's eldest daughter away when we still feel that he should have been here. So this crisis has hit, and it's just it's remarkable. As I speak to everyone today, they all have someone in their family or a close friend that they've lost. So while my family's tragedy was not the norm back in 1995, it has unfortunately become that case around the state as we deal with the opioid epidemic and prescription drugs in our area. In Richmond and Winchester, deal with heroin and carfentanil coming on, and fentanyl attributing to the 770 of the 1,200 deaths in Virginia this past year. It is a problem with 7% growth around the country that does not seem to be slowing down.
Well, as you said, this is something that has unfortunately and tragically affected so many families, and there is growing realization and awareness of the real pain and the real carnage that substance use can inflict on families. And so I would like to extend my condolences to you on the loss of your brother, but also thank you for sharing that story and for the work you do to try to be part of the solution as a broad spectrum of stakeholders, from healthcare, from the private sector, from law enforcement, and so on and so forth, are working and engage collaboratively to try to both arrest and reverse this really troubling trend. With that, I'd like to tell folks where they can find out more information about Cordant, and that's online at cordantsolutions.com. That's CORDANT solutions.com. And then finally, before we close, we'll ask you a question that we ask many of our guests on the Patients Come First podcast, and that is a little more lighthearted after a bit of a serious discussion, which is this. Alan, if you were stuck on a deserted island and you were only able to bring one book and one album with you, and this may be difficult for you because you said you like to share your book reports with people, and we will spot you a copy of the Bible, so you already have a Bible in your possession. What other than the Bible, what one book and one album would you bring with you?
Well, that's a tough question for a book lover. I think right now Nathaniel Philbrick, In the Heart of the Sea, is a book that I could read over and over, as I have. It's a great, very compelling story of human survival and resilience. So I guess that would be my book choice. And as far as one album, and I may get tired of it, I would say the best of Van Morrison.
Okay. Well, those are good choices. I think everyone's got a favorite Van Morrison song. It's standard wedding and sort of prom fare, I would say.
Yeah.
Well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Patients Come First podcast. We appreciate Alan Hardwick for joining us. Again, you can find out more about Cordant Solutions and its laboratory programs and offerings at cordantsolutions.com. Alan, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Julian. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. That's going to do it for today's episode of the Patients Come First podcast. You can find new episodes as they become available at www.vhha.com. You can also find episodes of the podcast on SoundCloud. We also encourage you to engage with us on social media, including Facebook and Twitter. If you'd like to send us comments, questions, or feedback, you can do that through our Twitter account at VHHA using the hashtag PatientsComeFirst. Thanks.